always fun their bios. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their roles. So I'll start with Representative Bart Cannon, sitting next to me. She is a Georgia State representative and a very successful one at that. She's been around a number of terms now. And you started out the youngest.
I did. I enjoyed political theater way too young. I decided at 23 to stop working at a clinic and to go to the state capitol and to focus on voting rights, police accountability, and reproductive justice. This is year 9 of serving District 58, which is Midtown, downtown, in Southwest Atlanta. It was recently redistricted. You might remember there were some court cases over it over the past 3 years, but it ultimately goes right to the city of South Fulton line to 285. And I live in the Old Fourth Ward, and I'm just super grateful that we are here to talk about this important moment right now.
Thank you, Representative. I forgot to really introduce myself. I'm Dana Barrett. I'm the Fulton County Commissioner for District 3. We're sitting in my district right now. I have Midtown down to about 10th Street. I have all of Buckhead and south part of Sandy Springs. So happy to get maps out if anybody's interested later. All right, moving down the line, I've got LaShandra here. She is from the Fulton County Registration and Elections Department, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Again, I am LaShandra. I serve as the Voter Registration Outreach Manager and one of the public information officials for the Department of Registration and Elections. And you guys saw us rushing in. Today is election day. And so, but we love Commissioner Barrett, so we want to make sure we have to give our due diligence to make sure we can educate District 3 on all things election. I'm happy to be here. My department within registration and elections is that outward facing vehicle of the department. So we're the face of the department, and what we do is go across the county to ensure that we're educating all of our registered voters on how to vote, what they need to do to vote, make sure they know the laws surrounding the vote. And as laws continue to get passed, we always just make sure we're creating an equitable system for all citizens across our 15 municipalities. So I'm happy to be here and share any information and answer any questions you all may have.
And then of course, down last but not least, at the end of the line, we've got Rachel Glover, who is joining us. She is the Voter Access Project Associate Director, I believe, for ACLU in Georgia. So talk a little bit about your role and your work with elections.
Yeah, so I work with ACLU of Georgia, which obviously cares a lot about voting rights and access to ballots. I run our Voter Access Project, which is our kind of policy and organizing arm of our voter rights work. And so we have a program called Local Election Advocates and Defenders, which we call LEAD, where we monitor local board election meetings throughout the state. And we closely watch the state election board, which happened today as well. And then I do other just kind of policy organizing work, and then work closely with our legal department. But I myself am not a legal person, but they have a lot of cases that they handle for us on the legal end.
You know, it's kind of funny. I think I'm not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. Usually when you have electors in there, at least one of them is a lawyer. So we should probably get a lawyer in here at this law firm, make sure we don't say anything out of line. I want to really kind of start with just some of the terminology and the basic wording here tossed around a lot as it relates to elections. And we call this Securing the Vote 2026. I often refer to, and I'm sure we all do, to free, fair, and secure elections. And so I just wanted to see if I could get each of you to talk a little bit about what those terms really mean from your perspective. And I'm sure we're all a little bit different. So I'll start with you, Representative. And you all feel free to jump in.
Good stuff. Yeah, I grew up here in Georgia and learned about voting in my school, but never voted until after I left the state of Georgia. I was in college at UNC Chapel Hill, and I found out that they had same-day voter registration for college students. And there was a very important ballot measure, which would allow for same-sex marriage, a proposition. And so I registered and I voted, and the measure did not pass, but it started and piqued my interest in maybe I should try to vote back home. And when I started to try to figure out how to reignite my voter registration here, I realized how different the laws were. And that in fact, for Georgia, you have to have a Georgia identification card. You cannot be a student at Spelman or Georgia Tech and be able to vote here unless you have changed your actual physical address. And so for me, as a young person getting into the political theater realm, I really started to realize that it's not fair for many students who spend all of their time, pay their money, enjoy living here, but don't get to participate. So I care a lot about the fairness that happens in elections. And you might remember a few years ago, Senate Bill 202 got passed at the State House all in one day. This is a 200-page bill that just changed all the voting code, I mean, from top to bottom. And I knocked on the governor's door, they arrested me, they took me to Rice Street Jail. I was about to have 8 years in prison. The district attorney, Bonnie Willis, reviewed the case, and mostly the officers and the other majority members said they found me to be annoying, and that they thought that the live stream of the bill signing, that they could hear my knocking on the door. That was all debunked, and so she threw the case out. I then went to the Georgia Supreme Court and sued the state over my arrest because I sustained a number of injuries. And we found out in October that we did not win our case, but this year will be 5 years since that arrest. And so we say keep knocking because we want to keep elections fair.
And so what we see in our role, as she was saying, for example, about the students, well, I did a number of, well, actually, we make sure we visit every Fulton County College and University prior to election day and prior to the voter registration deadline. So for those students who do want to change their residence while they're here and participate in Georgia elections, they know how to do so and what they need to do. So we do spend, like, we'll be at Georgia Tech tomorrow, for example. So we try to make sure we do that with all our students. I think my idea, not even my idea, but what we strive to do in Fulton County is make sure everyone has access to the ballot. No matter what, like I know there was a lot of commotion and confusion when SB 202 was passed, and as well as many laws get passed. We don't dwell on what is passed. We look at what is passed, and then how do we still make sure we have access for everyone who wants to be able to go to the polls. So that's what my idea is when we're talking about free and fair elections. How do we make sure that every Fulton County resident that is registered to vote, so Fulton County right now, we're at a little over 847,000 registered voters. How do we make sure there's access for all of them throughout all of our 15 cities? Like if it said that we can have, a drop box and everywhere we want it and it's not accessible outside anymore. Okay, now it's inside. Let's make sure people know this. Like, how do we get this information out? So we spend a lot of time going to senior centers, going to our college and universities. I send letters and memos out to our senior centers, our colleges and universities, our high schools, just so we can make sure they know what is happening. So that's what I foresee our role to be. My position was created after the 2020 election because it was needed. They said there was a need for someone to be able to go out into the community on behalf of Fulton County. And so that's what I see my role and my team's role, as well as our county role, to do, is to make sure we get the information out to ensure that anyone who wants to vote has access to vote and they know what they need to do.
Something I find myself screaming in my head during a lot of these state level meetings that where they talk about elections is that voting is a right and not a privilege. I feel like there's a lot of individuals that still believe that are trying to put in laws and systems to make it to where voting is a privilege for only certain individuals that they think have more power or should have the right to vote. But, we fully believe that voting is just a basic civil right, and every American citizen should have the right to vote. And we try to do our best to ensure that the policies we see passed and the actions we see taken are really keeping voters at the forefront and really putting them first and making sure that their access is the most important thing. So I think we're just constantly trying to remind lawmakers and individuals to just kind of always be pro-voter and put them first.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna pretend I'm a panelist and a moderator. I think that, you all sort of alluded to this in different ways, and one of the things I think about when I think about the word free elections, and I think that comes out of a different time period in a lot of ways. Yeah, when there were real barriers, to voting. And I think when I think about free elections, I think about removing anything that's burdensome from a voter, in particular, something that is burdensome and inequitable. So whatever the challenges are to vote, it should be the same for everybody. So if one person can get to their polling place in 30 minutes, then everybody should be able to get to their polling place in 30 minutes. If one person has to wait 2 hours in line, everybody should have to wait 2 hours in line. Let's make sure that we're doing it equitably. And I know that's part of everybody's mission here. So that's what comes to me with free. And I think we call this securing a vote because there's a lot of concern right now and a lot of rhetoric on all sides about whether or not elections are secure. So we'll get into a little bit of that as we continue the conversation. I want to kind of dig in a little bit as to what some of the current challenges are in the upcoming election in 2026. And if there is anything, LaShandra, I'll kind of put to you the 2025 municipal elections. And just a reminder, it is election day, as we already said. And LaShandra had to like scoot over here and be with us, and she's gonna have to scoot right out and go right to the warehouse, right, to continue working all night on our election. So she has firsthand knowledge of the day-to-day for sure. But really, it's a question for all of you because you all come to this subject from different perspectives. But what do you see the big challenges as? We'll start with you this time, Rachel. For this 2025, 2026, and beyond.
It's a great question on like so many things. And I just want to say one thing for 2025 is just that because these are smaller municipal level elections, it's just getting people out to vote and getting people to pay attention to these races because they're extremely important. But a lot of times we all know that there's surge around the gubernatorials and the presidentials. And we don't see people voting for these smaller elections. And those are usually the people who actually make the most impact on your daily life with the decisions that they make. And so they're very important. In 2026, I don't know, people have been asking me this. They've been asking me a lot, like how I think 2026 is going to go. And to be honest with you, a lot for me right now holds on what happens with the implementation of Senate Bill 189 and the QR codes. For those who don't know, there was a passing of Senate Bill 189 in 2023, right? Yeah. I get my sessions confused sometimes. And they had a part of that bill was that you had to remove any QR codes or machine readable codes from the ballots by starting July 1st of 2026. And, you know, we've been seeing a lot of election officials and other advocates bring this forward to legislators a lot recently because we're like, it was an unfunded mandate. Like that's actually very expensive to change the programming of our machines and like make it to where you can get rid of the QR codes. And that's, I mean, you can speak more to that. Like there's training, like there's so much that goes into that. And like, they just need guidance on like, is this happening? Where's the funding coming from? And so honestly, to me, how 2026 goes kind of depends on what decisions get made there and what system we're going with. And a lot kind of hinges on that for me right now. I think we're also, the other challenge we're really seeing leading into 2026, which I'm sure you can speak to this more too, is that, again, with the funding issues, a lot of election offices do not have the funding that they need to be able to like put together the best elections that they can. And I don't blame the county election offices for that at all. Like that's not their fault. But it's forcing them to have to make difficult decisions sometimes, like consolidating polling precincts or closing down polling locations, or we're seeing a lot of places that formerly serve as a polling location not want to anymore because of security reasons or insurance reasons and things like that. And I think that that's going to be a challenge and something we're closely watching because like we were saying with the distance, it's like we look at, well, if you're consolidating these precincts and moving this polling location, you're now causing those people that had a 2-minute trip to have a 20-minute trip. And there's no MARTA station near there. There's no public transportation, you know, trying to point out these things, but kind of also seeing how that might affect voters as we head into 2026 as well.
So I have been following the Blue Ribbon Subcommission on the election. And so I think for us that is what is going to, I won't say make or break 2026, but it's going to have the merit of what happens, because this committee will be making recommendations in December as to what legislation potentially needs to be passed as it relates to elections. And so for us, it's more so, okay, legislature starts in January, what, 7th week of January, runs through April. Well, the first election is on May 19th.
Right.
Next year. And so it's one of those, when do we have time to train? When is something going to get passed? When is this implemented? And so it's more so of, not as concerned, like if it does pass, of course, we'll get the train, we're gonna do what we need to do to make it work, but more so on the public, because we have to get trained, and then we're gonna still have to try to get the information out to you all. But if there is something new, what does that look like? What does that mean for you? And so we're just making sure they are taken into consideration. I know there have been several elections directors. Gabrielle actually spoke at these Blue Ribbon Study committees, but I was like, when we saw the calendar, I was like, the first election is May 19th. Early voting, advanced voting will begin in April. And the advanced voting will end probably like not too long after the legislature closes out. And so it's more of, when we think about preparing for 2026, it's more from a training perspective and an education perspective. If there's change coming, how soon will we know this change is happening, so that we can do what we need to do to implement and then educate the public.
The only thing that I would just like to add is some more context around this Blue Ribbon Study Committee. It was a piece of legislation that was passed last legislative session to say during the summer and fall, these 6 legislators will be appointed to go around the state and to talk to all the different election officials they need to and brief each other on what's happening. And so they've been in Cartersville, they've been in Savannah, they've been around the state. And the reality is, as many of the committees, it is stacked for the majority. And so I serve as the secretary of the minority caucus. There are 80 of us, but there are 100 of the majority members. And so just like that, the committee has one minority member, Representative Syra Draper. Many of you might have known her to be the voter protection director for the party, the minority party, for many years, and she's an attorney, just an incredible mom, and has stood on the front lines really throughout the study committee to say, listen, we need to focus on what experts are saying, not just pass different ideas. And then to additionally add, that was a special committee that was added, but the regular committee that typically does elections work at the Capitol is the Government Affairs Committee. There is an elections subcommittee. They met about 4 or 5 times last session. All of those committees' hearings are still on the House website. You can go and you can look back and you can see them debating bills. Like, are we going to try ranked choice voting? Are we, going to do paper ballots? And so a lot of those issues really float up during legislative session. And so I just hope that you will come and join our office personally. It's Michelle, my chief of staff here in the front. Please. We love to have people at the Capitol, even if I'm not your legislator, just contact us and say, hey, I'm coming this day. And we try to engage enough on an issue that you care about, and then always do something about voting too.
I'm glad you brought up people coming down, because I was gonna ask at some point in the conversation what individuals can do. And I think that is one thing they can do. But can you talk a little bit, Representative, about how meaningful that is, having people come down? Does it really impact legislators?
Yeah, so we're citizen legislators. We're a part-time legislature. We get paid $17,000 a year. We, only spend time from January for 40 non-consecutive days at the Capitol. Then everybody goes back to their district. It just so happens that there are about 30 of us that are here in Fulton County. And so our districts kind of mirror the Capitol area. And so we spend a lot of time as the Fulton House and Senate delegation, at the Capitol when session is not out. But what we actually see is that during legislative session, most folks from the local area don't come, folks from the rest of Georgia come. And so it's really an all call to say, please come to your state capitol. And our typical day, 8 o'clock, we're in caucus meetings. 8:30, we've got some committee hearings. I serve on public health and insurance. And so insurance meets 8 o'clock in the morning, and we have all these different subcommittees. We'll go to the floor at 10 o'clock and we will formally, like, have the preacher of the day and pledge, and then we'll start reading the bills, first reading, second reading, they get assigned to committee, and I love this, like, I really, really enjoy it. Because I feel like there were times where people spent a lot of time interfacing with their governments because they had a need. As a state member, if someone has an unemployment issue, right, they're talking to the Department of Labor office finally, and they really have a need. And the Capitol, we oversee all of that. So all those agencies are there. You're, rubbing elbows and you're hearing the directors say, hey, we need more money for this in our budget or that in our budget. After we get off the floor, we typically go back into committees, and this is when you can testify. I mean, there was a person who came to our office last year and she said, I'm a librarian and I'm just worried about them banning books and I don't know anything about this. And I'm gonna sit here until you help me figure it out. And we did it, and she testified, and the bill did not pass. And, it just felt different to have a type of engagement. And then, of course, there are evening celebrations that take place on Capitol Hill or at City Hall or at the Freight Depot, based on, which organization is hosting whatever. And so if you would like to host something at the Capitol, you can always reserve that through a legislator for completely free. And so sometimes people will say, hey, I care a lot about voting. I want to just host a day to talk about voting, or I want to host a documentary screening, or I want to bring a group of college students there. We can host that room for you, and then you can just have free range to come vote. Thank you.
I love that it's that accessible, and I'm glad we had a minute to dig into that. You all brought up, some of the counties, and Rachel, you mentioned, some of the counties can't really afford to do everything they need to do. Fulton County, I think, has made a concerted effort, and certainly since I've been around, and certainly since 2020, to really shore up everything we do. And I think part of the, confusion and information that gets out there sort of makes people feel like their votes are not secure. And I know you're literally in the middle of it today. But can you talk a little bit about the process of, votes getting from the polling place back to the warehouse? What kind of facility we have now? We've recently opened a new elections warehouse that is state of the art. I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's pretty awesome. So I think it would be good for people to understand what we can and are doing in Fulton.
So when I began, sort of the end of 2021, I think we were in like 4 different locations. And so the service, I remember at English Avenue was not the best. And so if I wanted to call, say, the elections chief, I needed to just ask a question to say, okay, you probably look at this. If they answer their phone and you call after 3 times on, I gotta go get in my car and then drive over there to try to see what's going on. It could be any, or they were at another warehouse. And so in the August of 2023, we moved to now what we call the Elections Hub Operations Center. It's 600,000 square feet building. Half of that building is elections. The other half are other departments within Fulton County as well. But we have a warehouse now where we're able to house all of the voting machines, all of our supplies, all of our equipment, where we do retention, like everything is now in one building. And so now instead of having to get in the car to go ask questions, I just walk up the hall. Or, everyone is now in the same building. So our whole leadership team, everybody is now in the same building. And so it makes us work more collaboratively together. Not that we weren't doing that before, but now we're all together. So we can sit down and hash out things as they happen, as how to touch on votes and security and all that good stuff. So I just talk about what's going to happen tonight when I leave here. So for this election, it's a small election. So it's Senate District 21 runoff, which is in the 12th precinct. And so we have one check-in location. Typically with a larger location, we would have several check-in locations, but those 12 precincts, I don't even know about these 7 o'clock now.
It is 01.
So the manager should be saying right now, or should have just said, the polls are closed. They're gonna then close out the election. And then the first thing they're gonna do, they're gonna go to the scanner and they're gonna print the scanner receipts of what happened in that particular precinct. 1 will go on the door, 2 will then go in the envelope. They're gonna then pop out the memory card. It all goes into a yellow, we call it yellow long for envelope, and then that is sealed. And then what they do is sign off on the chain of custody. Sign off on the chain of custody, and then that goes to 2 runners. So 2 people will then get in their car and then take that envelope with the sealed memory card and the receipts to what is titled, what I just said, the check-in location. And so once our 12 precincts all get those memory cards to that check-in location, our nice officers, and you've been one with us before, they will then drive that down with our technicians to our warehouse. Secure, still secure, all sealed, and then they'll sign off the chain of custody to our technicians that are working on site, sign off all the memory cards, and then the memory cards then get uploaded. So you'll see probably in the next 15 minutes or so, if you check our website, you should see that first upload from advanced voting, because that was one of the law changes. We have to start making sure that all of our votes have been received with all of advanced voting absentee. The absentee that was received prior to election day, so that Monday, so last night, all of that has to be uploaded within 1 hour of the polls closing. So they're probably working on uploading that now. So the memory cards are going into the Secretary of State server. I'm looking at it because I see someone Secretary of State here. They'll go into their server, and then you'll begin to see that running sort of election results, the tabulation. You'll sort of see that. So your votes are secure, and then you can check it. Like once you do vote, once you check in on that poll pad, that goes into the new system we're using Jarvis. So you should be able to go back, look at your name and see your participation history. You should be able to see your vote counted. We get 30 days, but it's pretty much been pretty frequent. But technically, we get 30 days to make sure your vote is uploaded and shown, but you're able to look at that in the My Voter page. So we have a lot of different steps, a lot of different chain of custody, a lot of paperwork. Your poll managers, there's a lot of paperwork that you have to do, but we have systems and mechanisms in place. Video cameras are in our warehouse, all that feed to a central location, so we can always watch everything that is happening in there. So we really try to make sure that there was a concerted effort when we moved to that one location. It will meet all of the needs of every division for our elections department.
And from what I saw, I was able to go down to the elections warehouse during the 2024 election, and when there were a lot of people there, we had press from I think all over the world there that day, and there's a lot of really it's set up to be observed. So there's a lot of glass. You can see the actual cards being attached and uploaded, and you can see the tallies arrive as they're happening there. So it's really designed for maximum security and for public observation.
And then I'll add into that because she mentioned the public observation part, so because they probably have somebody fill it in for me because I'm also the MC for election night. And so everything that is happening when we start in that morning, anything that happens in that day, whether it be absentee or getting ready to start their process of tabulation, I'm announcing we're getting ready to do ... Or like when I was leaving out, I was letting them know our advanced voting team has just arrived. They're getting ready to check all the seals. They're getting ready to verify all of our seals. They're going to start cutting the seals. They're going to start running. So the same process that I described that the poll managers are doing tonight, that's what they just did at 4 o'clock for our 2 advanced voting locations. So they ran the receipts, and so they probably rolled out the board now so that the public can see the board, can see the receipts from that location, but we actually narrowed that out. And then we also create a PowerPoint presentation that shows, we have the scrolling up on because that was the other thing about the announced state of our warehouse. We have a huge screen that everyone can see. And so half of it is the actual results, and the other half is a PowerPoint, so that when the runners when the officers are coming in with our technicians from the check-in locations, I pop that slide up on the screen that shows what the precincts are for that check-in. So when we say this is Vickery Mills Middle School, that you can see these are the precincts attached to that school that just came in that we're getting ready to upload and serve. So we've tried to make sure we listen. We heard you say transparency. So we've tried to ensure if you're coming, you're going to understand what's going on. And I can tell you, we had media that broadcast from there. Last year, I think we had 3 different stations that actually broadcast their show from our elections. I mean, we had everyone there. Our election hub was packed last November with folks from all over the world.
When we're talking about some of the current challenges, I think there's a lot of conversation, there's some confusion around, and maybe some lack of voter confidence around the voter rolls and the registration process. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges around the registration process, and really anybody jump in?
Sure. So I would say this is another effort. We have a new registration chief that came into place. It's been 2 years now. And so we worked really hard with our GIS department to help us with voter rolls. Of course, our Secretary of State office, so the one unique thing about Georgia is that all 159 counties do the same thing, use the same database. And so we all have a dashboard where we make sure from where we clear those who are deceased, the felons, what have you, that we all make sure we're clearing out our dashboards. Now, what I will say is that when it's the election season, we're not able to process registrations in the midst of the election. So unfortunately, because we've been getting a lot of calls, so unfortunately, those who have registered to vote since July 28th, we won't be able to process those until we certify this election that we're in right now. And so when that happens, once we certify on Monday, our registration team will get back to work and start pushing all the registrations through that have been sitting. But there's a process that we try to make sure that we're clearing our dashboards and that we are auditing our road. So much so, once a month, our registration chiefs actually work with our GIS system to get the voter rolls to them, and then they run it through our GIS system in Fulton County across all of our streets, across everything that we have to ensure that if duplicates come up, they get that, they make sure we're aware of that. If they're missing, there's a street number missing, a street name missing, if there is anything that will come up that is across our GIS from a street perspective in Fulton County, our registration team is working with them. Along with, we have that tile as well through our driver system where there's a duplicate tile as well. But we've taken it a step further to work directly with our GIS as well. We also make sure we're communicating with our municipalities. Again, Fulton County is the largest in Georgia. We have 15 municipalities. So we also have to make sure we're working with them. And so prior to this election that's coming up in November, we had to reach out to all municipalities, send us your streets, because we don't know when an apartment pops up or a house is built or a new subdivision. So you have to make sure it's a partnership process with our municipalities to make sure we're getting all of that information so that if somebody is trying to register in a newly developed subdivision, they don't get this error message that we can't find, your street is not popping up, because we have to make sure we're putting it in if it's something new. So we've tried to make sure we've taken steps to ensure that you all have that safety and confidence in our voter rolls. Like our registration team does a great job of clearing our voter rolls on a daily basis. And once this election is certified, we're all probably pitch in to help clear it out prior to October 6th, because the deadline is coming up for November, which is October 6th. So we'll have a short window to clear everything we have sitting on our dashboard right now prior to October 6th to ensure that everyone who submitted their registration prior to October 6th can participate in the November 4th election. And so we also do, I'll just throw in that pitch, we do an elections academy where we take you through all our different divisions, what we do, and then I end it with a tour. Our last one is coming up on October 16th. You are welcome to sign up. For that, we dive a little bit deeper into elections. And that really just going to help cut down on some of the misinformation that is out there. So again, one of the things you have seen, or you should have heard from me by now, transparency. We want you to know what we're doing. We want you to see what we're doing. There's no secrets. We're not trying to hide anything. We have to follow the law. None of us get up and go to work and say, I want to go to jail today. None of us do that. So we're going to make sure we are following the law as it relates to the elections.
I'll just add a few things to that, but one is what you're saying, everything is very open to the public. Like, you can go watch the testing of all of the election machines. You can watch the tabulation. You can watch, you can see there's so much that is accessible to the public. And then also it's great for people to serve as a poll worker and to do these different things. Because we've had a lot of people be like, no, I didn't trust our election process. And then I served as a poll worker and now I'm doing because you learn that okay, these offices, they know what they're doing. And they are very passionate, care a lot about this work. But when it comes back to the voter listening and stuff, I know there's been a lot of talk about that, especially this summer and last legislative session, because that came up in some legislation this past session that didn't pass. And it's been a conversation with the study committee. I know the next one, if you want to learn more about voter list maintenance, tune into the October 2nd one, election procedure study committee in Covington, Georgia, or go, because they will be talking more about voter list maintenance at that study committee hearing. But it's a complicated topic. There's a lot of talks about dirty voter rolls. We hear a lot of people saying that our voter rolls aren't clean, and so therefore people must be voting fraudulently. And personally, I would say that that's not true, just because there's like, people on our voter, like, because people get upset because people will be registered in more than one state, right? You can be registered in more than one state. That is not against the law. That doesn't mean that you're voting in more than one state, because then that will get caught. There were some cases at the state election board today where somebody accidentally double voted and it was caught. That's why there's like these checks and balances and there's these procedures, and yes, sometimes mistakes happen or things happen, but like they are always caught through the audits and just through the systems. Like this one was a case of a woman that forgot she voted early, so she voted again, and they didn't know if she had voted, so she voted provisional. And then whenever they went to process her provisional ballot, they realized she had already voted. So it's like, those are why we have all these systems in place. And, you know, I would say that voter list maintenance isn't really needed because people aren't voting that shouldn't be voting. But I think it's important to just remember that one, I mean, so the voter list maintenance process just is a part of our state process, and the process our state follows is in line with the National Voter Registration Act. And these recent large purges, they sound very scary, but they were in line with the NVRA. But they are big because they don't do them every year. It's like every couple of years. And there's, you know, systems where if you haven't voted in several election cycles, you get moved to inactive. Inactive does not mean you can't vote. You can still show up and vote if you're marked as inactive. So don't freak out if you're marked as inactive. It just means that the election office maybe sent you some mail and it got returned to them, or they didn't hear back from you and you haven't voted in several cycles, but you can still vote. And then you're not fully canceled until again, it's like, you've been inactive for several cycles, and then they have to send you a notification. And then if they don't hear back from you, so like they take it very seriously if you are getting removed. But something we're seeing a lot of in Georgia is voter challenges. That's super unique to Georgia. Other states, not all other states have this. It was originally intended to just be a tool to be used that if you were getting someone's mail constantly to your house, and it was about their, like, you know, don't forget to go vote and their voter information, and you're like, well, they don't live here, I live here. You would take that case to your local county election board and be like, hey, this person doesn't live in this house, I do. And so it was meant to just be individual cases where you know for a fact, you know the situation. And instead it has turned into something where individuals are bringing back forth thousands of voters just to make these baseless mass voter challenges where they don't have real data or real information as to why they think these individuals should be challenged. It's a lot of counties like Fulton have created their own policies for how to handle these voter challenges, and that has been great and is helping a lot. But I think that is something that we continue to see as a threat. People are trying to inhibit others from voting through these kind of by manipulating the system a little bit.
I will say that I have heard somewhat anecdotally that people have gotten their registration at least made inactive. Maybe they're kicked off, but there's a lot of confusion. So I do encourage everybody to check their registration, mvp.sos.ga.gov or Google My Voter Page, Georgia, and just, it's very easy, you can check. And good to know that if it says inactive, you don't have to do anything, you can go vote. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd recommend calling your election office if you're marked inactive.
Can't hear.
Sorry. I was gonna say, maybe you can speak to this, but I would recommend still like calling if your election office if you're marked as inactive. But it shouldn't stop you from being able to vote.
And typically, when someone goes in that inactive status, we sent something to them and it came back. And then we sent them a notification, but the clock starts. So you can get pretty much on everything, they get about 40 days to respond back to us. And then if we don't hear anything, the clock goes out, then it comes into inactive status. And so the easiest way is I tell folks to go ahead and just update it on my voter page. They did a great job with updating my voter page a few years back. And so there's a button at the top that says edit. And just if your information is not accurate, make it accurate. You just literally update it and make it accurate. I mean, of course, you will get back into active status if you actually go vote. But if you're like in between right now, and our election is not until November 4th, early voting is October 14th, well, you have time to go ahead and update it on the My Voter page versus waiting until election day for the advanced voting.
Yeah, I think there is some confusion about what all that means and what you should do on there, what you shouldn't, what is mandatory and what is not. So I would also say that there's a lot of great information that the elections department makes available. Some of it's right back there on the table. and if you need help checking yours, they can help you right before you leave tonight. And I also think sometimes like we're sitting here telling you what we know, but the perception, by the citizens is different, right, than what we know. So I'm gonna come to you, Representative Kim, because I know you're, in the field talking to your constituents. What are people saying? What are you hearing from people in terms of their, impression of what's going on in those elections?
Last year, I really talked to folks blue in the face who are within my subset of age group, millennial or such, or Gen Z, who were saying, I'm not voting. I'm just not doing it. I'm not participating in this system. And what I uncovered in those conversations had a lot to do with voting as a solution to change everything. I want it to be a magical wand that fixes it. I have a candidate or I have a ballot measure that I love, and if I don't get it, now I don't want to participate. And I have really pushed back on individuals to say voting is a practice. Just like if you were a sports enthusiast, you were not always the top. You had to practice. You had to figure out if the gymnasium door was closed, but it was 6 o'clock and you're supposed to be in practice. Okay, maybe I need to go in the front door. And a lot of those different changes to polling places after the pandemic. My polling place was a senior citizen building. I love my building. We had a great time. I do bingos there. And, I personally knew that it had not had changed from a polling place because I visited it very frequently. However, others did not know. And so when you get to the polling place and now you're told it's going to be this new location, and it turns out the location was a gymnasium that was about 2 blocks away. But for those individuals who were in that building, who might be aging in place, might be bound to a wheelchair, to get across the street 2 blocks away is a barrier. And so the very differences between even the age groups and the commitment to vote, we started to get into some intergenerational conversations, and I still want to host more. If you are interested in being a part of an intergenerational conversation about voting, please let us know, because what we have realized is saying to young folks, people fought and died and went to jail for the right to vote, it does not cross, it does not reach. In fact, it is a kind of a guilty shaming version of trying to engage with folks. And instead, what we're trying to do is to loop folks together on long-term solutions. And so thinking about, how a seat over the terms of 18 years, over the terms of a 10-year of redistricting, how it has changed instead of it feeling so incredibly immediate. And I'm really grateful to talk about voting with folks, but I do think that we have to individually share our stories a bit more. And so I will stick around a little bit at the end. I like to hear people's voting stories about the first time that you voted. That's typically how we start our intergenerational conversation. And that's why I started this panel tonight with my first time voting.
Love that. I have like 20,000 more questions and we're getting short on time. So I'm just gonna kind of ask one more and then I'll try to go to the questions we have from you all. What do you guys see coming down? And this is really a deep question, I think. We all know a little bit, because I know you're all watching. But you've got a legislative session coming up. You guys alluded to it a little bit already. What's on your radar that we really should be focused on?
So the Secretary of State's office is appropriated by the legislature. Although we talk about all these different bills, our number one job is to balance the state budget. And so to say, in this current year, when we get to session next year, did the Secretary of State's office use all their money? Or do they actually need some more? And we reaggregate that. And then we go to the next year and we say, okay, what does SOS office need? There have been so many interesting pockets of funding that have moved to the Secretary of State's office, namely a lot around, I call it policing and surveillance. However, other folks would just call it integrity. And so this conversation about integrity, there is an organization called the Election Integrity Network that is actively working against many of the great changes and things that have been longstanding that have been happening in elections. And so I ask that you pay attention to the EIN this coming legislative session, and also that you attend our Fulton County delegation meetings. They typically happen on Thursdays because we meet for legislative session based on a piece of legislation that we pass in the beginning of year that says, these are the days that you will be in the House. These are the days that you will be in the Senate. And so we try to hold meetings always on the last legislative day of the week. And many legislators like to get back to their hometown, so we a lot of times don't meet on Fridays. But on Thursdays, Fulton County, we see it as this kind of like, everybody's left. Everybody in Fulton, just come back to the Capitol, let's just talk about what happened this week. And so we would love to add you to our Fulton County delegation public information list, so you can also attend when we start back January 10th or so.
Anything that you guys are really concerned about or really watching, coming out of legislative session, please, or coming up in the legislative session, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between what I think might be topics of conversation and what I think should be topics of conversation. I think it's this, like we talked about this election procedure study committee. This is the first time I've seen a study committee on elections like this, and it's something we were asking for, like as those of us who do lobby and advocacy at the Capitol, like we've been asking them, like, just slow down, pay attention to the electoral process, pay attention to how the laws you are making impact voters and impact the election offices. And we're so happy that they did move forward with the study committee. But very, very curious to see what kind of report is going to come out of this committee and what kind of impact it will have and how much sway it will have on the laws that come, that get put forth next session. I think election funding needs to be a huge topic, because that's something we keep hearing from the election offices and keep preaching. You know, if you look back at that, it was the second meeting that was in Rockmart, Georgia. Some incredible election directors spoke, and they shared how in their counties they could do this incredible voter education and voter outreach work. Like Fulton County does incredible work, but then in some of the smaller counties, they don't have those same funds available. Like they don't have that same ability. So I think we really need to see a conversation around that. I think we also need to see a conversation around election governance. And I think we will, because that's also been coming up a lot. You know, again, for the sake of transparency and accountability, we need there to not just be the elected bodies, but we need to also have these other bodies that are overseeing. Like, you know, it's good to have the county level election boards. It's good to have the state election board to kind of have that level of accountability. But we aren't necessarily seeing all these boards currently function in the way that they were designed to and that they were meant to. And so I think we need to have some conversations as well about our current election governance system.
Maybe have a little more consistency across the state. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go to the questions, and like I said, we had you guys do the cards because if everybody had a question, there was no way that was gonna work. We could do some duplicates, but I've got 4 in my hand, so instead of me reading them, I'm just gonna call your name and let you say the question. Nate Watkins, you had a question about security at the polling precinct.
Yes, I had a question generally around physical security at polling precincts. I manage a precinct actually in your district.
Okay.
And we have not had election security since 2022. And I'm wondering if there have been changes put into place to improve that, especially in the wake of political violence.
So you haven't had a roving officer, never an officer come and check in?
Correct.
What precinct?
11J.
I have to check that, because that would seem odd. So I will make sure that we check that. Nicole, will you write it down for me? I'll double check that, because we try to make sure that on election day and advance, when we have officers at every location. And typically for election day now, I know they've grouped some, and they typically will have a roving security officer, but I would say for sure for 2026, especially based on what happened with us last year, with the bomb threats that we received, we would definitely probably have an officer at every location.
And LaShandra, is there something you advise the precinct managers to do if they're worried about something or they feel like their area in particular needs more security?
Yeah, I mean, in their training, I do believe they go over a little bit about security and all that stuff in training, but it hasn't been so more so recently with a lot of the political lines, or even going back to probably 2020 prior to me. But I know there were some things that happened with some of our poll workers in the county, so that's why I was like, that seems odd that no one. So we'll definitely double check that. But I know our director makes an effort to ensure that everyone feels safe and secure, because we did have some election workers last year after the bomb threat. Some just went home, some didn't come back. So that really impacted us because we had to find others to then go to those precincts so we could continue having that election, because there were several happening. Because you gotta imagine, every time we get one, we have to stop. And we have to go physically check that actually facility to make sure there is no threat, which then stops the election. Then we have to get the judges involved to extend the election day from the amount of time it took to go and search. So I definitely will follow up. We typically have tried, I know, in the past, typically to make sure we have an officer at every location.
To that.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
great. Kathy, Spencer, I know you had a question which we answered some of, but you.
Yeah, no, I think mostly, on that answer, my concern was about the security and election systems and how secure are they from tampering, and then about, how are the results safeguarded?
Yeah, I think the one part of the question that you did really touch on was the tampering of with the machines, or can you speak to that at all?
So in terms of tampering, you mean like somebody hacks it, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I think that happened, but people talk about that, so
Well, one thing we always try to make sure people understand, because a lot of people have this preconceived notion that the machines are connected to the internet. They're not. They're not connected to the internet at all. So that typically, once we say that to people, they're like, oh, like there's not and then there's not a way, the way the coworkers are trained and our staff are trained, there's not typically a way somebody's getting in and able to put something. Everything is sealed. Everything has a seal. They probably, if they're poll managers, they probably like, we hate the seal. I mean, not that they hate the seal, but in terms of, I hate the seal when they get to that ballot recap sheet, because you gotta capture every single seal from every single machine. And then I know even recently there was one of the machines that came back and somebody said, oh, the seal had fell off the door, where it's locked physically as well. So even if there was a seal that fell off, they still can't get in because you don't have the key or that you need the mechanism to get, because we might be the only county, I'm not sure, that actually has the carry. A lot of other people have where they have the screen in one bag and the printer, but we actually have the carriers for that all in one. So which helps it even be more secure, because you're able to just close and lock the doors and seal them up. And we have to rent big box trucks to get to and from our locations. And we have transport with that as well, with our supply team getting all of our equipment back to the locations. We have our sheriff's office and our officers help us with that security mechanism as well. So we do try to make sure that everything has a seal, has a place, and chain of custody that goes with it.
Yeah, it's not that I thought.
Yeah.
But about all of the safeguarding.
Something that I want to emphasize in the last study committee that came up a lot is that reconciliation happens, like every election worker kept emphasizing this, but reconciliation happens in the polling place every hour on the hour, which means that they're checking the poll pads against the machines, against the scanners to make sure that everything lines up, and they're doing that every hour. So they know if, it never happens, but they would know if there was just some extra votes just snuck in there somehow, because they're doing that reconciliation going.
All right, I've got a question from Victoria King about gerrymandering.
Yeah, it was very work going on, across the state. I just wanted to know, I ain't putting a special fair district, something to report for it. And according to them, they said that Georgia had planned on doing it. So I just wondered if that still stands. That still stands.
But we're not
We just
redistricting.
want to end on them as far as, redistricting.
Right, so I mean, our Georgia process is, every 10 years when everybody completes the census, and it doesn't matter if you are a citizen or not, but you just say, I am this person, this is what I look like, and this is where I, am. And then we go back in and we try to figure out from the state level first, who is in which district. And, this whole term about, gerrymandering, it's actually Gary, his name is Gary. And he's cutting districts that look like salamanders, so it's gerrymandering. And this process and this practice has unfortunately continued to happen it's starting with legislatures and then it trickles down to our locals as well. So 2.5 years ago, the state of Georgia, we went up through the process. We said very clearly that we felt there were specific districts that had racial gerrymanders and went to court and the judge said, yes, we need to redraw these districts. We went to a special session, we redrew the lines, we came back and they said everything was okay. The minority caucus does not believe that the districts are okay. In fact, we saw more packing, like even District 58, I'm happy to show somebody a map. You know, it was already, you know, looking very interesting, not just like a typical shape. But what we now have seen is so many members are just pushed into one area. And so we're looking forward to, again, more people being interested in this process and actually coming to the legislature, coming to the Capitol during those processes, because you can be a part of the hearings. There are attorneys that are all over the place. And ultimately, we believe, right, that legislators, we don't get to pick our constituents should pick us. And so in that process, that's why we need people there to say, no, this doesn't make sense that, for example, Ponce de Leon is a state road. So the Claremont Lounge on one side is in a state district and Honey Bubble is in the other side, in another district. And so for a split community, that's ridiculous, right? These are folks who you walk across the street the same way. And so many districts, unfortunately, are going to have to experience that for another 7 years until we get to our next redistricting session. And Texas is going through it. So many states like you alluded to. And then, you know, our local, for example, like Jason Dozier at the city level, I know he had half of Centennial Olympic Park. They'll have all of it after this redistricting. And so that local redistricting process too, if you prefer to go to your local government and view that process, we ask that you do that next time too.
Yeah, and I think Fulton, and I wasn't there yet, but I think Fulton, there was some controversy about how our districts got drawn at the time. And, you know, people were, a lot of it would happen because people weren't paying attention. So we need you to pay attention on our end too. Ralph McCorner had a question about precinct cards. Go ahead, Ralph.
Which question was
You had a question about, oh, you had two on here, is that
Yes.
whichever one you want.
is, y'all probably know this, this gentleman has a precinct
Yes.
card by state law is not forwardable. I think like 10% of Georgians move every year. And I believe if they move within the county, they can still vote at their old address. Is that, no, that's not correct. Okay. Well, if they, anyway, in the short term, let's say the month of October after the deadline for the election, 1% roughly Georgians are gonna move in that month. If they have a forwarding address at the post office, they're not gonna get the precinct card if it goes out in that month to say, oh, your voting place on election day is now moved. They're not gonna get that. And it just seems like, that's a law that's not, there's no purpose to that because eventually the postal change of address thing will get back to the Secretary of State in the counties of, okay, this person moved, they haven't updated their address. But in the short run, they're not gonna know where to vote, so they're gonna go to the wrong place maybe. And they may go to the other place or.
I'm a precinct manager myself, and that's, this is what we
Yep.
talked about.
Yeah.
It causes problems managing voters. We're at the North Side Library.
Okay.
And, I want to praise the team of Fulton County. We get great support from Fulton County, great training. But this card from the Secretary of State's office causes us a lot of headache. People don't look for it. This is innocuous. It gets lost in the mail. And over half, well over half, sometimes 60 to 75% of people that show up at the North Side Library are at the wrong location.
Wow.
And it causes PR problems. It causes rising temperatures, and we don't need that. There's some, either we need to color code this and announce to the state, look for your pink card coming out. But I have lived in the same house for 13 years, and I've been a precinct manager for 4 years, but worker for 7 years. I've had in 7 years 6 different cards with 6 different changes. So this is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, reality is you don't need that to go vote, though. You don't need your precinct.
No,
That's
no,
just aware.
But you're
Just
having to
making
see
sure where, which is why we,
you're having to send people to
Yeah.
other locations.
Right.
Yeah.
It causes problems of it. I think
but to answer your earlier question, you can only vote in, like, you can, obviously, we have vote centers during early vote where you can vote anywhere in your county, which is why we always recommend people vote during early vote. On election day, you have to go to your precinct. If it's after 5 p.m., you can vote
provision.
it provisionally in the wrong precinct. If it's before 5 p.m., they will send you to your correct precinct, which the poll workers can look up in the poll pads and see where your correct precinct is going to be. And this is also why we tell people to always check the MVP, SOS on My Voter page, because that will have your correct precinct. Unfortunately, sometimes that site has gone down on election day. So we tell people to make a plan early, and know like where you're gonna vote, how you're gonna vote, and just like make a plan in case these things happen as they do.
But the
this
guidelines
is
is the
interesting.
fall. And the last election, we were told not to deny, if someone insists at 10 o'clock in the morning, if they want to vote, we let them vote.
And I said,
And they
because all the
even though
time.
they're in a long location.
And we will tell, and our coworkers are trying to say, hey, your precinct is X, Y, and Z, but some people, and we've received the calls, when the calls come over, they're insistent, sometimes not saying no good, nice words to our coworkers, and we'll try to explain to them,
So
your vote is not gonna count if you vote prior to 5 p.m. It's not gonna count, but our coworkers are not gonna tell
we
them that.
can't say that.
Our coworkers are trained, they're not gonna tell them, they're not gonna turn anyone away. Now, they called out to our office, and I answered the phone, I will tell them. If you are insistent and you're gonna put your vote, and you're voting out of precinct provisional, because they're gonna, and I said, you'll notice, they're gonna look at their watch, or they're gonna see what time it is, and they have to notate that on the document to show what time you voted. So when we get to that point at the election day, when we're having to go through our provisional ballot, all those ones that are out of precinct prior to 5, we can't process those by law. That was the law change.
And the
We can't-
provisional ballot takes time. It is not just going in and checking a box. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes per.
So I will say, we have changed several polling locations. We had to change some more this year. And some people are like, why, look, it's our fault. There are some people saying you can't come back. You know, we did receive bunkers, or those machines are massive. You're messing up our floors. You're blowing out power. And so there are a variety of different reasons why, or we're doing renovations. So you can't be in here during this time. So there are a variety of different reasons why we've had to change polling locations, but we try to make sure, and our logistics team typically is going out, either that Monday, that weekend prior to the election, or even like that week before the election, and putting signs out at the old location to say, this is, if you used to vote here, you now vote at such and such. So we blew up these big signs. Our nice marketing.
Thank
She
you.
makes them. So just make our sign, and we make sure we put them out everywhere. Of course, we do try to, we don't try, we do mail out the precinct cards. And that's the thing I can say with MVRD, everything as it relates to communication to the voter is by mail. And so maybe one day on the federal level, this will get updated, because it hasn't been updated since the 90s. And so, you know, the world has changed a lot. Technology, there's a lot of different things out there, but by law, our communication method to the voter is by mail.
Yeah,
That's clear. This is saying, well, voter precinct.
This is Secretary of State.
but it's also, like you said, it's required by law for them to send that out, so.
But I do think that
Ultimately comes up to law.
it is also, all your information is available on the voter page. And I think we can all do a better job as elected officials, and you all even helping us as people who are fairly engaged, who want to be here.
And
And
onto the commissioner piece of the card. If
Sorry?
I go in the chat, you have the opportunity.
yes, exactly. So you can look, you can see the actual card, exactly the same format. You can download it, print it. But I think we can kind of all help let people know, check before, check the week before, check the day before, make sure you know exactly where you're going. And if you have friends that are seniors that, struggle online, help them get online and show them where to do it. My mom's tech support for a lot of things, so I think that's okay. But I think I take that point from both of you, and I think we can do as a better job of trying to remind people to go check online where they should be going.
I understand the federal.
Uh-huh.
So it says you have to mail it. Does it say you cannot communicate by any other means?
Well, you have to think, that was passed in 90, I don't wanna make it up. But it was in the 90s. I was trying to remember, it's 96 or somewhere around in there when it was passed. So you have to think, a lot of this technology, the way we do what we do now wasn't even something they would be
No, I
considering.
understand that's some mandatory.
But so
But is
our,
there an optional, say, okay,
no, our,
we have to mail it, but we're also gonna text everybody, because we know that's.
there's no, it doesn't provide for that. So for what we send everything is our communication, like even when we, again, like, we get return mail, well, more than likely they probably move, but we're gonna send that notification to that same address. That they probably will, you know, so that's the notification mechanism in place, right now.
There are, and there's also public notice procedures for polling location changes and stuff like that. And if you look at like the Fulton County website, you'll see all of the polling location. Like they make it very bold, and some counties are better at that than others, but they are required to do public notice. But again, these times have changed. Before it was like public notice was like your local newspaper, like when the law was originally written, right? And like we don't have as many local newspapers now, or people don't always pay attention to that. So there's ways in which our laws need to update with the times. But I can say, I know Fulton does a good job with putting out notices at polling locations, because I send my election protection observers to check, and they do it, so.
Yeah, I really hear what you're saying. I think we need to look at the laws and lobby for changes, to try to make it easier. for people. I don't think there's any partisanship to that, right? I think we all need to know that, so. All good, yeah. You got people taking notes on all of this, so I appreciate it. And, you know, we're kind of well over time, but if anybody did have anything, anybody else want to ask anything before we wrap up? No, okay. Well, I want to thank our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? For being here and walking around for a little while, if you have questions you want to ask.